Whispers on the wind. The wind carried the first whispers of the storm long before it painted the horizon brown. A low, mournful howl snaked through Harmony Gulch, rattling window panes and whipping dust devils into frenzied dances in the deserted streets. Folks hurried inside, latching doors and drawing curtains against the inevitable onslaught. Hank Callahan stood on the porch of his ranch house, squinting at the approaching dust cloud. It billowed like a monstrous lung, sucking the color from the sky. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the parched earth. "Just what I needed," he muttered, turning back inside. The ranch house, usually a testament to bachelor neglect, was almost presentable. Almost. He'd spent the better part of the week scrubbing, polishing, and generally trying to erase the evidence of years of solitary living. The smell of lye soap still lingered in the air, battling with the more familiar sense of leather and dust. He'd even managed to coax a few wilting wildflowers into a chipped vase on the table. He ran a calloused hand over the freshly swept floor, feeling a familiar knot of unease tighten in his gut. Clementine. Her name tasted strange and foreign on his tongue. A mail-order bride. The whole thing felt wrong, rushed, desperate. He'd been lonely, sure. But was this the answer? Trading loneliness for what exactly? A stranger. A woman whose face he hadn't even seen. Beyond the blurry photograph he'd received alongside her overly embellished letters. He snatched a crumpled photograph of Sarah from the mantelpiece. Her smile, frozen in time, mocked his efforts. Sarah wouldn't have wanted this. Wouldn't have understood. He shoved the photograph back, the glass rattling against the wood. He shouldn't dwell on that now. Clementine was coming. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on the threadbare rug in front of the fireplace. It was worn thin, faded from years of use. He hesitated, then knelt, tugging at the corner. He'd meant to replace it, but hadn't gotten around to it. Too many things left undone. He hauled the rug outside, the wind snatching it from his grasp and sending it tumbling across the yard. Let the dust claim it. Meanwhile, at Abernathy's general store, Agnes Abernathy was holding court. The approaching storm did little to dampen her enthusiasm for gossip. She leaned across the counter, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you hear about Hank Callahan?" she said to Martha, the baker's wife, who was purchasing flour. Martha, a stout woman with flour dusting her apron, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Can't say I have, Agnes. But I imagine you're about to tell me." Agnes chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "He's got himself a mail-order bride coming in on the stage next week." Martha gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "A mail-order bride? Hank? Well, I never." "That's what I said," Agnes exclaimed, puffing out her chest. "Imagine. After all these years, and after, well, you know." She trailed off, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Poor Sarah, bless her soul." "Who is she?" Martha asked, her curiosity piqued. "A Clementine, I believe. From back east somewhere. All the way from Philadelphia, no less." Agnes wrinkled her nose. "Probably never seen a horse, let alone ridden one." "Philadelphia?" Martha echoed, aghast. "What would a city woman want with a dusty old rancher like Hank Callahan?" Agnes shrugged, a knowing glint in her eye. "Who knows? Maybe she's running from something. Or maybe she just wants a husband, any husband. Though why she'd pick Hank, I couldn't tell you." The wind howled outside, rattling the store's windows. A lone tumbleweed bounced against the door. Agnes leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They say she's got freckles, too. Covering her face like a speckled hen's egg. Can you imagine?" Martha shuddered. "Freckles? Goodness gracious. Well, I hope she knows what she's getting into. Hank Callahan is a hard man." Agnes nodded, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Indeed. A hard man with a lonely ranch and a whole lot of adjusting to do." She straightened up, her eyes darting to the window. "Looks like that storm is really kicking up. Best be going, Martha." As Martha hurried out, clutching her flower, Agnes watched her go, a thoughtful expression on her face. Clementine. It was an unusual name. And Freckles. Well, maybe the girl had more to her than met the eye. Maybe. The stagecoach would arrive soon enough, and then Harmony Gulch would see what the wind had blown in. Far away, on a train chugging westward, Clementine clutched a small, worn book. The landscape outside the window blurred into a monotonous tapestry of brown and green. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and anxious. She traced the constellation of freckles scattered across her nose with a trembling finger. Harmony Gulch. She whispered the name, hoping it held more promise than fear. The wind outside carried her hopes and her doubts, scattering them across the vast, unforgiving plains. The girl with freckles. With a final, protesting groan, the train wheezed to a stop, showering the sun-baked platform of Harmony Gulch with steam and grit. Clementine Bloom, her fingers white around the handle of a well-traveled carpetbag, gazed out at her new beginning through a smudged pane. A fragile spark of anticipation flickered in her breast. Near the time-worn depot marker stood Hank Callahan, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat against the relentless afternoon glare. Sleep had been a stranger lately, haunted by a phantom of Sarah's laughter, her beckoning hand forever beyond his grasp. He tugged self-consciously at the collar of his best, now dusty shirt, a garment not donned since. Sarah. Logic dictated this arrangement was right, a helpmate to combat the solitude, a partner for the demanding ranch work. Yet a gnawing unease persisted, a feeling akin to sacrilege. As the train door squeaked open, a young woman emerged, shielding her eyes from the blinding sun. Her simple azure dress accentuated a slender figure, and her hair, the color of ripened grain, was bound in a severe coil. Hank's breath snagged. She possessed a certain appeal. Then they struck him, cinnamon sprinklings. A scattering of freckles dusted her nose and upper cheeks, a celestial map etched onto her skin. A pang of disappointment, unexpected and sharp, pierced his composure. He hadn't considered freckles. He hadn't considered this particular reality. Emboldened by a surge of nervous energy, Clementine advanced. "Mr. Callahan," she inquired, her voice barely audible. "I'm Clementine Bloom." A small, uncertain smile touched her lips. Hank offered a brusque nod, his gaze riveted by the offending blemishes. Rudeness wasn't his aim, but the sight was like a cold draft extinguishing a nascent flame. His mental image, amorphous though it was, bore no resemblance to this. Agnes Abernathy, a woman of considerable girth, leaned against the entrance of her general store, observing the unfolding drama with unconcealed interest. Nothing escaped her discerning gaze, the girl's timorous smile, Hank's averted eyes, that smattering of color across her face. She jabbed Martha, wielding a broom on the porch, and whispered, "Well, ain't that something? Looks like Hank ordered a hen and got himself a speckled pullet." Martha's cackle was nearly swallowed her broom. Sheriff Brody, propped against the hitching post, meticulously shaved curls from a block of wood. He noted the exchange with knowing silence. He witnessed the glint of disillusionment in Hank's regard, the girl's manufactured cheerfulness, and the nascent tendrils of town gossip. Hank was a decent sort at his core, Brody knew, but grief could contort a man. And the newcomer, there was a quiet resolution in her eyes that piqued his curiosity. Hank cleared his throat, the sound jarring and forced. "Welcome to Harmony Gulch, Miss Bloom." He reached for her bag, his fingers fleetingly brushing hers. Her skin felt unexpectedly soft, like the downy velvet of a wildflower. He recoiled slightly, unnerved by the unforeseen gentleness. "I'll take that." Clementine surrendered the bag, her smile dimming almost imperceptibly. The weight of his silent censure was almost palpable. Her freckles had always been a source of insecurity. Back in Boston, the other girls had tormented her, dubbing her Freckleface. She had harbored a naive hope that out here, in the expansive West, they would be of little consequence. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," she answered, her voice a thread. She fought to ignore the heat creeping into her cheeks, the familiar prickle of humiliation. She would make this work. She must. Refuge lay nowhere else. Hank pivoted and strode towards his wagon, the carpetbag thumping against his side. Clementine trailed behind, her eyes fixed on the dusty earth. The nascent hope within her had withered, a delicate bloom crushed beneath the burden of his unspoken disapproval. The trek to the ranch seemed interminable, each step a weighty reminder of her perceived flaws. The whispers of the town, carried on the breeze, felt like miniature daggers. Harmony Gulch felt anything but. Cast aside. The silence hung like a shroud. Callahan hadn't even bothered with basic courtesy, and Clementine remained stranded just inside the doorway of his parlor, dust devils pirouetting in the sunbeams, each mote a tiny accusation. She smoothed the gingham of her best dress, a futile attempt to soothe frayed nerves. "You're smaller than the picture I had," Hank finally grated, his gaze raking over her with the calculating appraisal one might give to a yearling. His eyes, the gray of a squall line, offered no welcome, only a weary disappointment. "And those freckles?" He forced a level tone. Clementine's hope withered. The freckles. Her mother had deemed them sun kisses, but city women favored porcelain. She'd even dabbled with lemon juice, but the constellations stubbornly remained, dusted across her face like spice. The advertisement. She started, her voice a fragile thread. Hank dismissed her with a curt wave. It called for a helpmate. I needed someone more robust, someone equal to the work, someone like Sarah. The name snagged in his throat, a raw edge of grief flashing across his lined face. The truth crystallized. This wasn't about her appearance, not truly. It was about a phantom. She was a poor imitation of a memory he clutched too tight. I see, she whispered, the words tasting like defeat. She didn't completely, but she understood rejection. Hank simply nodded, pivoting to face the window and the desolate expanse beyond. No offer of train fare, no offer of sustenance, no offer of anything. Just dismissal. Clutching her meager bag, Clementine retreated from the parlor. The door snicked shut, the sound echoing the hollowness inside her. She stood on Harmony Gulch's sun-baked main street, abandoned. The town moments ago brimming with potential now bristled with indifference. Carts rumbled past, stirring up gritty swirls. The mingled odors of burning wood and stale spirits choked the air. She walked without purpose, her steps weighted, her heart a stone. The mercantile, the forge, the saloon with its beckoning batwings, each facade seemed to amplify her failure. She skirted the church, its pristine steeple a beacon against the worn landscape, but lacked the will to enter. What petition could she possibly offer? A new identity? A different destiny? A cluster of children interrupted their game of hopscotch to stare, their young eyes wide with curiosity and a discomforting hint of pity. Clementine lowered her head, quickening her pace. She drifted to the fringes of town where buildings surrendered to scrub and barren fields. The sun blazed against her skin, the dust parched her throat. She felt like a discarded sapling, ripped from the earth and left to perish. A guttural growl sliced through her despair. She froze, every nerve on high alert. A large, ungainly dog observed her from the shadowed recesses of a dilapidated shed. A patchwork of breeds, with a perpetually cocked ear and a battle-scarred muzzle. Clearly he knew hardship. Instinctively, Clementine tensed, bracing for an attack. But the dog merely stood his ground, his tail offering a hesitant wag. His hazel eyes, intelligent beyond expectation, seemed to reflect a shared experience. Slowly she crouched, extending a cautious hand. "Hello," she murmured, her voice unsteady. "Are you lost too?" The dog edged closer, sniffing her outstretched hand. Then, to her utter astonishment, he nudged it, a gesture of unexpected solace. He wasn't threatening, only solitary. As she stroked his coarse coat, she spied a worn leather collar circling his neck. A dull tag dangled from it, barely decipherable. She strained to read the inscription. P.A.T.C. she ventured. The dog, Patches, offered a soft whimper and pressed against her leg. A spark ignited within Clementine's chest. Perhaps she wasn't entirely forsaken. The dog settled, planting his hindquarters on the ground and gazing up at Clementine, his brown eyes full of knowing. He would be her companion now. Patchwork of hope. The dust devils had finally settled, leaving Harmony Gulch bathed in the amber glow of the late afternoon sun. Clementine, however, felt anything but settled. Her trunk sat stubbornly in the center of her tiny rented room, a monument to her uprooted life. She longed to unpack, to create a semblance of order, but a restless energy thrummed beneath her skin. Instead, she found herself drawn outside, the worn soles of her boots kicking up small clouds of dust as she wandered. She walked past the saloon, the raucous laughter spilling into the street, a stark contrast to the quiet ache in her heart. Past the general store, its shelves overflowing with unfamiliar goods. Finally, she came to a vacant lot on the edge of town, a neglected patch of earth choked with weeds and littered with broken wagon wheels. Something stirred within her. Not a grand design, not a meticulously planned vision, but a quiet whisper of possibility. This wasn't just barren land, it was potential. A canvas waiting for color. That evening, armed with a borrowed shovel and a fierce determination, Clementine began to clear the land. The earth was hard and unforgiving, but with each swing of the shovel, a small victory bloomed in her chest. She tugged at stubborn weeds, their roots clinging to the soil like unwelcome memories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced around her, Patches appeared. He didn't bark or whine, didn't even wag his tail. He simply sat, a silent sentinel, his amber eyes fixed on her. His presence was a comfort, a quiet affirmation that she wasn't entirely alone. The next morning, Clementine visited the general store. Old Man Hemlock, usually taciturn, seemed almost chatty as he helped her select seeds. "Tomatoes do well here," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "And beans. Can't go wrong with beans." She chose a packet of each, along with sunflowers, a splash of vibrant yellow to brighten the landscape. Back at the lot, she carefully tilled the soil, her hands calloused but gentle. She planted the seeds, each tiny speck a promise of future bounty. As she worked, she spoke to them in a low murmur, telling them about the sun, the rain, and the dreams she hoped to nurture alongside them. Patches, as always, was her shadow. He circled the perimeter of her makeshift garden, sniffing the air, his ears perked. Once a mangy-looking coyote crept too close, drawn by the scent of freshly turned earth. Patches let out a low growl, a rumble deep in his chest, and the coyote, sensing the dog's territorial claim, slunk away. Clementine watched, a warmth spreading through her. Patches, the solitary stray, was guarding her garden. Days turned into weeks. Clementine's freckles, once a source of shame, deepened under the relentless sun. Her hands became rougher, her clothes perpetually dusted with soil. But with each passing day, her garden thrived. Tiny green shoots emerged from the earth, reaching for the sky. The sunflowers, true to their name, turned their faces towards the sun, their bright yellow heads a beacon of hope. One evening, as Clementine watered the fledgling plants, Patches nudged her hand with his wet nose. She knelt down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the ridges of old scars beneath his matted fur. "We're making something good here, Patches," she whispered. "Something beautiful." He licked her hand, his tail giving a tentative thump against the ground. In his eyes, she saw not just gratitude, but a shared sense of purpose. A patchwork of hope, stitched together with sweat, soil, and the silent companionship of a scarred, solitary dog. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in Harmony Gulch, Clementine was beginning to believe that a start was all she needed. Sweet success. The air around Clementine's cottage vibrated with a new sound, a high-pitched hum that resonated deep in her chest. It wasn't the wind whistling through the dilapidated eaves, nor the mournful howl of the saloon dog, Buster, who still faithfully sat on her porch. This was the busy drone of bees, hundreds of them, flitting between her riotous blooms. Clementine watched, mesmerized, as they dove headfirst into the vibrant faces of her sunflowers, their fuzzy legs dusted with golden pollen. The lavender bushes buzzed with activity, a symphony of industriousness that filled the silence Harmony Gulch had imposed upon her. Agnes Abernathy, perched on her porch swing across the dirt road, fanned herself with a church bulletin and watched with narrowed eyes. She muttered something to her cat, Mittens, who blinked languidly in response. Agnes, a connoisseur of gossip, hadn't missed a single thing since Clementine's arrival. She had initially predicted swift failure, but now the sheer volume of bees had piqued her interest. Days turned into weeks, and the floral display only intensified. Clementine, emboldened by her success, invested in proper beekeeping equipment, a smoker, veil, and hive tool, mail-ordered from a catalog she found tucked in the back of the general store. Buster, initially wary of the buzzing creatures, now seemed to consider them part of the cottage landscape, occasionally snapping at a stray bee with a lazy swipe of his paw. The day she harvested her first honey was momentous. The golden liquid, thick and fragrant, dripped from the honeycomb into a glass jar, catching the afternoon sunlight like liquid gold. The aroma filled her kitchen, a sweet, heady perfume that eclipsed even the strongest floral scent. She carefully strained the honey, removing any stray bits of wax, and labeled each jar with a simple, handwritten tag, Clementine's Harmony Honey. Hesitantly, she placed a small table in front of her cottage, displaying her wares. The first few days were agonizingly slow. Dust devils danced down the deserted street, mocking her efforts. Buster, as always, remained a steadfast companion, his mournful gaze fixed on the horizon. Then, one morning, a young boy, dusty and barefoot, approached the table. He clutched a few copper coins in his hand. "Ma sent me," he mumbled, avoiding Clementine's gaze. "Said it smells good." Clementine's heart leaped. She carefully scooped a spoonful of honey onto a small wooden paddle and offered it to him. He tasted it cautiously, his eyes widening. "It's sweet," he said, surprised. He bought a small jar, clutching it tightly as he ran back towards town. The next day, others came. Mrs. Peterson, the baker, tentatively purchased a jar, her expression guarded. Old Man Hemlock, known for his sour disposition, grumbled about the price but bought too, claiming it was for his arthritis. Even Agnes Abernathy, curiosity finally overcoming her skepticism, crossed the road, Mittens trailing behind her. "Heard tell you're making honey," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. She examined a jar closely, sniffing it delicately. Smells pleasant. Clementine offered her a taste. Agnes dabbed a tiny amount on her finger and tasted it. Her eyes widened slightly. Well, I'll be, she muttered, grudgingly impressed. She bought a jar and surprisingly offered Clementine a piece of unsolicited advice. Don't let Hemlock cheat you. He'll try. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Clementine counted her earnings. It wasn't much, but it was enough. More than the money, it was the tentative acceptance, the cautious smiles, the sweet taste of success that warmed her from the inside out. Harmony Gulch, it seemed, was slowly, tentatively beginning to thaw. Stubborn pride. Hank Callahan leaned against the rough-hewn porch post of the general store, a knot of resentment tightening his gut. He watched Clementine across the dusty street, her bright yellow dress a stark contrast to the muted browns and grays of Harmony Gulch. She was laughing, actually laughing, with Mrs. Olson as they examined a bolt of calico. A small crowd had gathered, their faces open and curious, not the suspicious, narrowed stares he'd seen on their faces the day she arrived. He'd been observing her for days, a silent sentinel of his own stubborn pride. He couldn't deny the change. She wasn't the trembling, uncertain woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach. She was blossoming. Helping old man Hemlock with his garden, teaching the school children a new song, even coaxing a smile out of the perpetually grumpy blacksmith. Each small act of kindness, each interaction, chipped away at the wall he'd built around his disappointment. Agnes Abernathy bustled out of the mercantile, a basket overflowing with freshly baked bread. She spotted Hank and, with a knowing smirk, waddled over. Well, Hank, she said, her voice dripping with sugar and something else, something less pleasant. Seems your little freckled sparrow is quite the hit. Hank grunted, pushing himself off the post. She's just being helpful. Helpful? Honey, she's charming the skin off this town. I heard she even offered to mend Reverend Peabody's trousers after that unfortunate incident with the fence. Imagine, a mail-order bride fixing breeches for the preacher. Agnes chuckled, a sound like pebbles grinding together. Some say she's got him wrapped around her little finger. Not that I blame him. A man gets lonely. Hank's jaw tightened. He didn't like the direction this conversation was taking. Leave Peabody out of this, Agnes. Oh, I'm just saying what folks are saying. You brought her here, Hank. You can't expect people not to talk. And you should probably put a ring on it soon, or you might find another man willing to overlook a few freckles. Agnes patted his arm, a gesture that felt more like a branding iron. My advice? Keep her busy. A woman with too much time on her hands gets ideas. Sheriff Brody, who had been observing the exchange from his usual perch on the boardwalk, sauntered over. His eyes, usually crinkled in amusement, were now hard and steady. Agnes, he said, his voice low but carrying weight. I think you've said enough. Agnes bristled. I'm just looking out for Hank, Sheriff. Someone needs to. Hank can look out for himself, Brody said, his gaze unwavering. And I suggest you find another pastime besides spreading gossip. Harmony Gulch doesn't need any more trouble. He paused, letting his words sink in. Clementine Bloom is a guest in this town, and she deserves to be treated with respect. Understand. Agnes, momentarily deflated, huffed and marched off, muttering about busybodies and minding her own business. Brody turned to Hank, his expression softening slightly. She's a good woman, Hank. Give her a chance. Hank looked away, his gaze fixed on the swirling dust devils dancing in the street. It ain't that simple, Brody. Maybe not, Brody said, his voice laced with understanding. But holding on to what's gone won't bring it back. And it sure as hell won't let you see what's right in front of you. He clapped Hank on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Hank alone with his thoughts and the haunting memory of Sarah's smiling face. He watched Clementine as she tied a bright ribbon around little Millie Peterson's pigtail. The little girl giggled, her face alight with joy. Hank felt a pang of something unfamiliar, something that felt a lot like guilt. He didn't deserve Clementine's kindness, not after the way he'd treated her. Yet, admitting he was wrong felt like admitting defeat, like admitting that Sarah was truly gone. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The storm. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of ozone and damp earth. A peculiar stillness fell over Harmony Gulch, silencing even the raucous laughter usually spilling from the saloon. Above, the sky churned, bruised purple bleeding into angry gray. A lone crow, its caw swallowed by the rising wind, fought to stay aloft before finally surrendering and diving towards the distant hills. Maeve, hanging laundry behind her cottage, felt a prickle of unease. The wind, which had been a gentle caress only moments before, now tugged viciously at her apron. She yanked the washing line free, a sheet snapping like a gunshot, and hurried inside. Finn, the saloon dog, whined at her feet, his fur bristling. He usually loved the wind. "Something's coming, Finn," she murmured, securing the latch on the window. Outside, the first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering against the dusty street. They were quickly followed by a torrent. The wind howled, a banshee wail that rattled the windows and shook the flimsy walls of the cottage. Maeve huddled by the fireplace, clutching Finn, the dog trembling against her. Across town, Sheriff Brody squinted at the sky from the porch of the jailhouse. Even he, hardened by years of frontier life, felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He'd seen storms before, but this felt different. Wrong. He barked orders at Deputy Clem, who was struggling to secure the shutters. "Clem, get to the general store. Warn Mrs. Higgins. See if you can get the Andersons into the jailhouse cellar. It's the sturdiest thing in town." Before Clem could respond, a deafening crack split the air. A bolt of lightning struck the old oak tree at the edge of town, sending splinters of wood flying like deadly shrapnel. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning timber. Panic erupted. People poured from the saloon, their drunken revelry forgotten, scrambling for cover. A child screamed as a gust of wind tore a plank from the roof of the mercantile, sending it crashing into the street. Horses whinnied in terror, breaking free from their tethers and bolting down the muddy thoroughfare. Maeve's cottage shuddered violently. A window shattered, sending shards of glass across the floor. Finn barked frantically, clawing at the door. She knew they couldn't stay here. It was too dangerous. Grabbing a shawl, she wrapped it around Finn and threw open the door, battling against the wind. The sight that greeted her was one of utter chaos. The wind ripped through Harmony Gulch like a living thing, tearing at everything in its path. The sign above the saloon swung precariously, its rusty chains groaning. Debris swirled through the air, broken branches, sheets of metal, even entire sections of fencing. People were running, shouting, their voices lost in the roar of the storm. Suddenly, a sickening crunch echoed above the wind. Maeve watched in horror as the roof of the blacksmith shop, weakened by years of neglect, caved in. A plume of dust and debris exploded into the air. She saw Jebediah, the blacksmith, stumble out, his face covered in blood, before collapsing to the ground. Ignoring her own fear, Maeve pulled Finn along and stumbled towards him. The wind threatened to rip her shawl away, but she held on tight, her eyes fixed on the fallen man. She had to help. Harmony Gulch was being torn apart, and she was one of the few left who could still stand. Healing hands. The air hung thick and heavy, a cloying mix of damp earth and splintered wood. Clementine, her skirts hitched high, navigated the debris-strewn streets of Redemption. Patches, usually bounding ahead, trotted close by her side, his ears twitching, sensing the unease that permeated the town. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of bruised skies and broken lives. She reached Mrs. Abernathy's collapsed porch, the elderly woman sitting amidst the wreckage, clutching a chipped teacup. "Oh, Clementine, child," she wailed. "Everything's gone." Clementine knelt, gently examining Mrs. Abernathy's arm. A nasty gash oozed blood. "Not everything, Mrs. Abernathy. You're still here, and so am I." She rummaged in her satchel, pulling out a poultice of comfrey and yarrow she'd prepared that morning, its earthy fragrance a stark contrast to the scent of decay. "This will help. I need to clean it first." While Patches licked Mrs. Abernathy's hand in silent sympathy, Clementine cleaned the wound with rainwater she'd collected in a vial, then applied the poultice. "This should help stop the bleeding and prevent infection. I'll be back tomorrow to check on it." News of Clementine's healing abilities had spread like wildfire. She wasn't a doctor, but her knowledge of herbs and honey, gleaned from her grandmother, proved invaluable in a town where the nearest physician was a 2-day ride. She spent the morning flitting from house to house, tending to the injured, a boy with a sprained ankle, a farmer with a gashed leg, a woman suffering from shock. Each application of her remedies, each soothing word, brought a small measure of comfort to the ravaged community. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the wreckage, Clementine headed toward the saloon. It was the only building still standing relatively intact, and Sheriff Hank Callahan had converted it into a makeshift infirmary. The air inside was thick with the smell of sweat, whiskey, and antiseptic. The wounded lay on cots and blankets, their faces etched with pain and weariness. Hank, his face grim, moved among them, offering water and gruff words of encouragement. Clementine saw him wince as he lifted a heavy crate. She pushed her way through the crowd. "Hank, let me help." He glared at her, his jaw tight. "I don't need your help." "Your arm is bleeding," she pointed out, ignoring his dismissive tone. "Let me see it." He hesitated, then reluctantly allowed her to examine his forearm. A deep gash ran from his elbow to his wrist, crusted with dried blood. "Just a scratch," he muttered, but his face betrayed the pain. Clementine clicked her tongue. "A scratch that's festering. Sit down." She led him to a quiet corner, ignoring his protests. Patches settled at her feet, his eyes fixed on Hank with a wary gaze. Clementine carefully cleaned the wound, her touch gentle but firm. Hank watched her, his expression unreadable. "I know you don't want my help," she said softly, "but people need you, Hank. You can't afford to be stubborn right now." He remained silent as she applied a thick layer of honey and a bandage of clean linen. When she finished, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Why are you doing this, Clementine?" he asked, his voice rough. "After the way I treated you." She shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do. Besides," she added with a small smile, "someone has to keep you out of trouble." He didn't return her smile. He looked down at his bandaged arm, then back at her. His gaze lingered on her freckled face, a flicker of something akin to regret in his eyes. "Thank you," he mumbled, the words barely audible. Clementine stood, a fragile hope blooming in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, the storm had washed away more than just buildings and belongings. Maybe it had washed away some of the bitterness and resentment that had plagued this town. As she turned to leave, a low growl rumbled from Patches. She glanced back. Hank was still watching her, his eyes dark and troubled. The storm might have passed, but the storm within him raged on. A change of heart. The throbbing in Hank's leg was a dull counterpoint to the sharper sting of Brody's words. "You were out of line, Hank. Plain and simple. The whole town saw it. That girl hasn't done a damn thing to deserve your whatever that was." Hank stared at the ceiling of the infirmary, the rough-hewn beams blurring slightly. "She's a distraction, Brody. We don't need distractions." "Distractions? Or is it that you can't stand seeing folks happy, Hank? Seeing them smile at something other than the bottom of a whiskey glass? That woman brought sunshine into this dusty town, and you tried to stomp it out like a prairie fire." Brody's voice was low, but it vibrated with genuine anger. "I'm ordering you, Hank. When you're well enough to walk, you're going to apologize to Clementine Bloom." Hank grunted, turning his head away. He saw Patches lying faithfully by the door, his ears perked, eyes fixed on him. Even the dog seemed to disapprove. The weight of his actions, amplified by the pain and Brody's reprimand, settled heavy in his gut. The next morning, Hank, propped up on a makeshift crutch, hobbled towards the general store. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. He barely slept, wrestling with his conscience and the nagging throbbing in his leg. He saw Clementine through the window, her back to him, arranging jars of pickled peaches on a shelf. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The bell above jingled, announcing his arrival. Clementine turned, her blue eyes widening slightly. Patches, instantly alert, rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Clementine," Hank began, his voice rough and used to apologies. I owe you one." He shifted his weight on the crutch, though it groaning under the strain. "What I said, it wasn't right. It wasn't fair. You came here in good faith, and I treated you poorly. I was wrong." He looked directly at her, meeting her gaze. The freckles scattered across her nose seemed more pronounced in the morning light. "I'm sorry." The words felt clumsy, inadequate, but they were honest. Clementine studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then a small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said softly. "That means a lot." Patches, sensing the change in atmosphere, whined softly and sat back down, thumping his tail gently against the wooden floor. That afternoon, a small bouquet of wildflowers appeared on Hank's bedside table in the infirmary, tucked into an empty tin can. Later, Mrs. Abernathy, the baker, brought him a slice of her famous apple pie, still warm from the oven. "Figured you could use some cheering up, Sheriff," she said, her eyes twinkling. The town had spoken. They had embraced Clementine, and in doing so, they had subtly but firmly rebuked Hank's behavior. He saw it in the way folks greeted Clementine with genuine smiles, in the gentle pats on Patch's head, in the extra portions of stew offered at the saloon. Clementine, seemingly unfazed by the initial hostility, blossomed. She helped old Mrs. Peterson with her gardening, mended torn clothes for the children, and even taught a few of the townsfolk how to play checkers. Her laughter, light and airy, drifted through the streets, a welcome melody in the often silent town. Hank watched her from his window, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within him. Regret, certainly, but also something akin to hope. He saw her kneeling beside Patches, scratching him behind the ears, and the dog leaned into her touch, his tail wagging with unrestrained joy. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Hank leaned back against his pillows, the scent of apple pie filling the small room. For the first time since the stagecoach arrived, bringing with it the mail-order bride with a cascade of freckles, Hank felt a sliver of peace settle over him. Patches, lying faithfully outside the infirmary door, let out a contented sigh.